Progress. It's an interesting word which can be defined in a number of different ways. It can refer to movement through space, like a car on a highway. It can also describe our collective advancement as a society across the arc of time. Under both definitions, what ultimately constitutes progress is often a matter of perspective. Perspective is also important when considering the things that impede our progress, like traffic. One of the challenges we face today, at a time of rapid technological change and growth, is how we move physically from place to place. This afternoon, I'd like to talk a little bit about transportation through the lens of two fascinating historical figures who may help us understand how we got where we are and where we're headed. Anyone who's ever spent any time on Long Island is probably familiar with Robert Moses. If not his smiling face, at least his name or his work. Throughout much of the early 20th century, Robert Moses was one of the most influential figures in all of New York State, presiding over several municipal agencies which planned and constructed major public works projects that shaped the growth of the region. His epic biography by Robert Caro is entitled The Power Broker, and during this period, Moses was clearly that. Robert Moses was a progressive planner. He saw government as a vehicle for change, and he positioned himself to conceptualize and construct the infrastructure that would drive that change. He built beautiful parks filled with soaring monuments that we continue to utilize and appreciate today. He was also a man of his time, and his vision for the future was full of men in suits, probably wearing hats, driving swiftly on open roads in streamlined automobiles. It was a compelling vision, but one which left little room for alternative perspectives, and he was relentless in his pursuit of it. Provisions for public mass transit were conspicuously absent from the Moses Master Plan, and established communities that were in the path of his concrete freeways were either bulldozed or unceremoniously subdivided. Ironically, for a man who traveled everywhere by car, Moses never learned to drive and never held a driver's license. Here he is with Walt Disney and Henry Ford, not driving. One of the few major projects that Moses was unable to complete was known as the Lower Manhattan Exchange, or LOMEX. It was a huge multi-lane highway that was intended to speed traffic across the city, which might have been great for some for a while. It also would have drastically changed and probably destroyed such historic neighborhoods as Soho, Little Italy, and Greenwich Village. The LOMEX project was brought to a screeching halt due largely to the efforts of this unlikely figure. In 1952, Jane Jacobs was a mother of three who held no academic degrees and was a freelance writer living in New York City. It was around this time that she began to find her voice and gain prominence as a grassroots organizer, pushing back against projects such as LOMEX, which were being pursued by the city in the name of urban renewal. She effectively articulated the feeling held by many that these efforts were tearing at the vibrancy and diverse culture of the communities in their path. Eventually, she would formulate many of her criticisms of these types of projects into a book entitled The Death and Life of Great American Cities, which is now one of the most influential guides to urban planning. She's considered to be one of the founders of the historic preservation movement and the inspiration for the new urbanism planning model, which seeks to reassert traditional neighborhood design principles. You can see she and Moses also differed in their preferred form of transportation. From our current and hyper-local perspective, it's probably easier to view Jane Jacobs sympathetically and see Robert Moses as he is now often portrayed, blindly ambitious and a bit of a bully. In fairness, however, though, it's important to note that Jane Jacobs is also considered by many to be the godmother of NIMBYism, or not in my backyard syndrome. Her legacy applied to our current way of life may be evidenced in what some have termed the balkanization of Long Island, where everything is decided at the local level, at the cost of a collective planning effort that connects across communities, which of course makes it difficult to move forward from prevailing paradigms. Which brings us back to gridlock. Traffic is an annoyance that most of us here can readily relate to. Of course, the impact of traffic on our life today is not just about traffic. The impact of transportation is not just about traffic. It's also a key influencer in the protection of our environment, geopolitical stability, public health and safety, social justice, and quality of life in the communities where we live, work, and play. To address these challenges, we need to look ahead. New technologies like zero-emission electric vehicles, web-enabled mobility solutions, and innovative public-private partnerships hold real promise to be transformative. We can also turn our gaze backward and remember how we lived and traveled before automobiles were the sole focus of our transportation planning. When luxurious ferries and frequent train service were the primary conduit for a summer trip to the Hamptons. We can rethink our car-centric development patterns and encourage walkable hamlet centers with opportunities for safe biking and recreation. Invest in viable public transit systems that are more than just an option of last resort. We can focus less on what traffic engineers refer to as throughput, or maximizing the flow of vehicles over a given period of time, and more on developing a transportation network and infrastructure which works within the context of the community, enhances connectivity, and improves our quality of life. In order to overcome our present gridlock, we must be able to come together to do big, bold things, construct new paradigms, embrace change, look ahead to the opportunities that innovation and technology bring, but at the same time, we must always be mindful of the way we lived in the past, how we got here and why. That would represent real progress. Thank you.